Hey Piccia, how are you?
Hi, Davinder. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing good. So,
Good.
before we begin, I usually ask for introduction, but I already know a lot about you. You are neck deep, I think complete deep into design UX. So, how did your journey start with this design and wanting to learn design and even teach design?
Yeah. So I have been around quite a few years. So when I started designing, I started with print, and I actually have an art history and theory background. So I started I started a small arts publishing company with some friends
Hmm.
many years ago in the 90s. So that's how it started. And then I moved to London. I'm Italian. But
Okay.
then I moved to London in the late 90s and did arts publishing there for quite a while, but then got bored of it because you're still doing always the same book. So it just got boring, and I got more into corporate design, branding, and working with big agencies in London and so on. But it was still not digital, it was always print or branding, which is kind of also wayfinding and things like that. And then I worked for the British Film Institute for
Hmm.
a few years, which was great because basically I was like watching films for a living and making film posters. So that was really good fun. But then I started really feeling I started because I'd always had a website because I've mostly worked as an independent. Even at the BFI, I was only employed for a little while, but then it just didn't suit me. I wanted to be independent because that allowed me to also work on other projects and so on. And I started being interested in being able to actually edit my own website. So I started learning about WordPress and the possibilities. And that's when I got really, really so sorry, I live in Spain now, so sometimes words come in Spanish at the wrong time. So I want to say, I started to get really fascinated by coding and designing on the web because I realized that it was a completely different story. So I started working with WordPress, and that's what changed everything for me. And in the past, it's 2019 now. I think for the past 4 or 5 years, I've really only ever designed digitally
Hmm.
uh, on the web. And last year, I started talking at WordCamps and
Yeah.
also other conferences about design topics. And it came out very clearly that those topics were really well received by an audience of developers
Yeah.
and marketers and people who design on the web, but they don't necessarily have any design training and they find it really difficult. And therefore, it seemed like I had an audience.
Yeah. The formal training for people who design, on web is kind of missing. Even I don't have formal training, but I design based on my liking because design is something that always interested me. Like I've been playing with Photoshop for almost a decade now. So, you know,
Yeah.
but so that's what we are going to talk about today, but we are going to focus on more on typography. So, majority of us, the web creators, we are not designers technically. And, we most follow this principle, let's make whatever client wants, and either we make it or we just tweak an existing template and finish the job. And word typography does not hold much significance in this space, at least for this audience or people who create websites. Now, to such an audience who do not know what technically a typography means, how would you define the concept of typography?
Well, believe it or not, these days the web is still 95% written text.
Yeah.
That is a hell of a lot, even with the rising of video
Videos.
content. I mean, we're creating content video now. It still is the overwhelming majority of what you see on the web is still written text. Therefore, typography is hugely important because it's the way you output this text. And to me, in fact, it's possibly the most important element in a layout. So it's really interesting that people don't really think about that. And in fact, I always notice it's the first thing that I notice in a website. And also, if you get into UX, which is something else that I'm really exploring at the moment, you soon find out that copy is in fact the number one most important thing when you plan a website in terms of the experience of your users. This can be confirmed by, for instance, Paul Lacey, who's someone else who's very active in our whole sort of WordPress circles, and who's been talking about UX with me on the live talks that I do, and he for Design for Geeks, which is my project. And he was, when asked the question, what is the most important element in the UX of a website, what's the first thing? And he said copy, and so did his partner. So how do you represent copy? You do it with typography. And therefore typography needs a lot of attention. And I don't actually have because you asked me how to define it, I haven't come with a sentence that defines typography. So that's a nice challenge that I will answer in the group soon.
We'll go step by step. Like, we'll explore the basic components of typography, and that would make more sense because we go like bottom up approach. Like, first, let's talk about fonts. Like, now with page builders, I'm sure even you use a page builder, it's easy to slap number of fonts on a single web page. You just have to select it from drop down box, and hey, we can go radically creative. But something that looks radically creative to me or to someone who's making the website, it may look horrible in terms of typographical parameters. So
yes,
if we follow strict typographic principles, how many fonts is too many on a web page?
Okay, I have to first specify the difference between fonts and typeface, because it's a really important type. I mean, the straight answer to that is 3 is already too many for me. But I need to explain the difference between font and typeface, because not everyone is fully aware of the difference. So a typeface is a family of fonts. For instance, let's say Work Sans, which is a lovely sans serif font in Google Fonts. The whole family has many fonts in it. Each font is, for instance, every weight of Work Sans is a different font. Even the styles, because it comes from typesetting at the times where it was done with lead, actual physical letters made of lead. So each typeface would have a number of different fonts that had to be physically made in that weight, in that style in order to be used. So when you talk about fonts, that's what I think about. I think about it could be the same typeface, still Work Sans, but in a different weight or a different style. So that's the thing. My recommendation for anyone who isn't that confident with typography, who doesn't know enough about typography, is to use one typeface and maybe 3 styles. Sometimes you need to use more than one style or weight. I mean, styles, you need your Roman and you need your italics and you need your bold, but in terms of weight and scale or color, then you should really use 2, 3 maximum. And my recommendation is to use one typeface and to choose a typeface that has lots of different styles and weights, which you can find. I mean, even if you just stick to Google Fonts, you can definitely find that. There's amazing variety. I mean, Work Sans is a case in point. It goes from super thick, extra black, I think. I can't remember what it's called.
Even Open
very,
Sans.
very thin.
Even Open Sans.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's
so many of them. And my next question was kind of related to it, like, which was about font combinations, like selecting a font for headline and selecting a font for the body text. Like, these are the 2 main things that you need to do when you're doing a web design thing. So are there any do's and don'ts in this regard?
There are definitely. Now, it used to be that you would choose a serif typeface for the body and a sans serif for the headings. But first of all, difference between serif and sans serif, because I find that it's never good to assume that people will know.
Mm-hmm.
So a sans serif font is a font that has straight lines with no embellishments, whereas a serif font is a font that has all the little lines and circles around things at the end of the.
We can explain with an
at
example.
the
Like serif would be like Georgia, and
yes,
and serif
and
sans would be open sans.
Open Sans or Arial, talking about the typical, it's your Times New Roman and Arial. Arial is sans serif and Times New Roman is serif. The serifs are the embellishments.
So those traditional principles still apply, like you combine a sans serif with, serif font.
Well, the thing is that you can do that, but unless you know what you're doing, I don't actually recommend it. Unless you know what you're doing, you might end up with a serif and a sans serif that don't work well together. It could be because they have different proportions. One is very compressed and the other one is extended, so that wouldn't work well. Or they just don't go well together in terms also of kerning, which is the difference between letters, or in terms of style. Because another really important thing to consider about typography is that it immediately communicates a visual style, a tone of voice, and even an emotion. Because if you use Arial or Times New Roman, it doesn't communicate much. It just communicates that you're very corporate and you haven't used your imagination at all.
Yeah,
but there are
lawyer websites generally use Times Roman,
Yes, if you don't need to particularly communicate anything, you want to be really factual, that's a fine choice. But if you want to communicate a particular style in the sense even of trend or fashion, or if you want to communicate even a historical period, there are certain typefaces that do it well. For instance, fashion uses an 18th century typeface which is called Didot, which comes from Bodoni, which is an 18th century typeface, and it's very elegant, very classy and very classic, but at the same time it sort of maintains this modernity. So it's the Vogue typeface. So it's really important to communicate that as well. And what I see very much happening with websites that are designed by people who are not designers is that they don't, maybe the typography is not badly styled. It's styled okay, but it communicates nothing. And I think it's a missed opportunity because you could do so much more with it. And this is just in terms of style. Then when in terms of communicating the content and leading the eye, it's hugely important. And that's where UX come into play. And that's where what I was saying earlier about copy being such an essential part of UA. Because basically you use your copy to lead the eye of your visitor.
Yeah.
And to communicate hierarchy and importance of message.
Yeah, the flow of focus, how user will, consume your stuff or content on the page, besides images, the text part. Now, besides, the combination of fonts and all that, the other important thing is the font size. Now, is it acceptable to have like crazy big font sizes for that radical in your face, bold look? And on the other side, too small font for that, uber minimum look. Hey, we are minimalistics.
Yeah, this is such a good question. I have just refreshed the design of one of my projects, Web Design for Geeks, which is where, and I'm using absolutely humongous headings. I'm using the a scale. It's done properly. The scaling of the headings is done properly. But by following that, it means that I have humongous headings, and I love it. What you need to be careful with is that you need to make sure that that's still accessible and it doesn't ruin the experience of your visitor. So you need to make sure that your media queries are done in such a way that people on smaller devices can see the whole chunk of text as a whole and don't have to scroll down too much. So you need to be really careful. So in that case, then content is really also very important, because sometimes if the style matters a lot to me because I'm trying to communicate something important with it, then I will simply change the copy. I mean, they work together, which is also why copy is important.
But
and
not
in
the
fact,
font size, right? Because some people just reduce the font size just to look stylish. Like I've seen sites with 12 px font size, which is so hard to read, at least in now modern times.
that's really that's just wrong. So that I was about to say that yes, I'm all for really big, but I am never for too small. Absolutely never. Because if you do too small, then you have to make sure that you have accessibility tools on your website that allow your visitors to make it bigger. I can't even read 16, and I don't have any particular impairment. I'm just older and I need glasses. So in fact, yesterday we had a live talk with Colleen Gratzer, who's an expert on accessibility. And obviously we talked a lot also about font sizes, and 12 pixels is criminal because it's not, you can't see it. It's simply wrong. It wasn't even made to be that small. It just shouldn't happen.
I
Really.
never go beyond less than 16 px for the main text.
Yeah.
Usually I have like 18 px. That's like, it looks good enough and it's readable enough.
Yes, and also these days, really using M's or Rams instead of pixels is the best choice, really. And we had, I mean, if you wanted to go completely accessible with your typography, that's a much longer story. And I know enough about accessibility, but I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't be able to say. But yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about the text in the paragraph. Like
Yes.
I've seen web pages with paragraph text that runs from one edge of the screen to the other edge. Like now we have widescreen displays, and guess what? Reading, such a long horizontal text is really impossible. So is there a guide to tell that this should be the maximum width of your horizontal text? Because I personally stick to maximum 700 or 800. In other cases I can go to 900 px, but not beyond that.
Yeah, I would even say that sometimes 900 is even too much. I don't go by pixel. I go by character length, or I just use columns so that I know that it cannot go too wide. Yes, there is guidance that actually Google's material design, which is a fantastic resource, has all that you need to know about how to keep your typography readable, always readable, which because there's readable and there's legible, which is a different story. But however, so it has so much information, and it gives you so for line length, the ideal readability is I think up to around 60 characters is ideal on a big screen. Okay. And then I've got it here on another window, and I was just looking for the actual bit of the or where it says exactly, but I don't find it. And then it's different from mobile. It's 30 to it's around 30 characters per line. But the thing is that also, interestingly, the recommendation with mobile is to actually make the text a bit smaller than you would think, because people tend to read closer. But the line length, you are so right, is such an important thing to bear in mind. And it's a mistake that I often see that people make, and you can't, because I'm very much interested into the psychology of vision. And if you know a few basic rules of psychology of vision, that's going to make your websites so much more effective and so much easier for your users to enjoy and make the most out of. And one of the things is that our brain always likes and wants and strives to work as little as possible. So and this rule always works. whenever you design something in such a way that the brain has to work too hard, it's a failure.
Yeah.
So if you bear in mind, make it as easy as possible. There's a famous book, the title of which is Don't Make Me Think, by Steve Krug, which was written years and years ago. He keeps updating it, and it's an evergreen classic for web design. And that's basically it. You always have to think, my user has to think as little as possible. So if the line is too long, you're forcing the eye to go on for way too long, and then you get distracted and you've forgotten what was going on.
And you lose interest.
At the beginning. You lose interest, you lose the thread, you've lost me. So don't make them too short, but don't make them too long. And one thing that I always say in terms of typography is, when in doubt, go to one of the major newspapers, online papers, and see what they're doing, because my God, they do it well. If you look, for instance, it's one of my favorite newspapers, but The Guardian, the British newspaper, does a fantastic job with typography, because they have one typeface, just one, and they have to convey so many different types of information just with one typeface, just using variations of weight and style and color. But you can't rely on color too much anyway, because with color then comes accessibility. If you rely just on color to differentiate, you run the risk of a much bigger chunk of people than you think not being able to read it. So you can, in terms of line length, when you go to one of the major newspaper sites, you immediately notice that they out of the real estate space of a page, if this is a space, then the article is actually in here. It occupies a really much narrower area than you would think. And then when you go and check, you'll see that it's never beyond 60 characters, because they know their job really well.
And what about the vertical text spacing, the line spacing? Now, I can tell you my experience, like when I started like 10 years back, I used to have like 1.2, that would be the line height I would generally work. But now I don't work with anything less than 1.5 for actually body text, because that gives it like breathing space. I'll only use 1.2 if I have for the headlines, if they are like very bold and big text and you want them to be closer. But for the main text, I hate going below 1.5. What's your take in terms of, accessibility plus the typographical perspective?
So I don't think there's one single rule for this, simply because every typeface is different.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, my base size on my website for my typeface that I use is 22 pixels, because it looks as another font would look at 18.
Yeah.
So it really depends. It really depends on the typeface that you're using. But interestingly, to me, I always go lower. I don't like it. I don't like too much spacing, because I have a tiny, tiny, tiny visual impairment. That means that if there is too much white space, I see double. It's weird. But anyway, so I don't like too much space in between lines. There is definitely a rule. And the rule is, again, that if there is too much space between the lines, then the meaning gets lost. The two lines don't look as they belong with one another.
Okay.
So you shouldn't go too high. 1.5, I think, is fine for a lot of. I'm gonna look at your websites now with that in mind, because of course I've visited many times, so I can't remember the line spacing.
Because most of sites I use Open Sans. In Open Sans, 1.5 is perfectly fine. Even 1.6 won't look that. Again, that it comes to thing which font you're using. Like if I use serif font, I may go down to 1.4, because serif fonts tends to have more spacing between them in terms of relative proportion.
Yeah, it's but also, when I've visited, I haven't noticed anything wrong with this line height, so that means that you've done it right. So yeah, but that's the risk that you run when the line height is too high, when you then lose, because there's another rule of psychology, or Gestalt psychology of vision, according to which the eye tends to group together things that are close objects and elements that are close to one another gets grouped together,
And
and vice versa.
one thing I do want to mention, like when I increase the line height, I also increase the vertical space between two paragraphs. Like normally you will have like the standard height between two paragraphs is like 12 or 14 px. Generally the margin between two paragraphs, but I usually bump it up to 18 px, sometime even 24 px for that extra stylish look, because some clients want that, really radical creative design. In that you need to have little more space so that you can fill up the space, because they would want the full canvas, yet they would want the text to be spread out. But then when you're spreading text, you have to be a little clever. You can't spread it all over.
Absolutely. And you've touched on a really important point, which is white space.
Yeah.
And the fact that a lot of people who design but don't have training are very afraid of white space. They tend to fill up the space as much as possible. But that's not what you should do. You should use white space. White space is actually a design element just as much as anything else. And you said exactly the correct thing. If you increase the space in between lines, you absolutely must increase the space in between paragraphs, because otherwise, for the law of proximity, Gestalt law of proximity, your eye will not be able to differentiate between what the one paragraph and the next. So that's absolutely the correct thing to do.
I'm a Beaver Builder user. I think even you use Beaver Builder. Like in my Beaver Builder course, like in almost 70% videos, I mentioned this as a golden rule. When you add a new row, add top padding 60 px, bottom padding 60 px, and make sure you change that 60 to 20 for mobile view, and then start building so that your foundation is strong enough to hold your content. Because we tend to add rows, and they get like squished, and there's no focus between those rows. Because I've seen sites where people would just work with normal 20 px height, padding top and padding bottom, and the text looks fine within the row, but when your focus is going from one row to other, you don't feel like there's a flow of content or information there.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, there's his name is David Kadavi. He's a designer and also a writer who's written a great book called Design for Hackers, which is kind of similar. The concept is designed for people who are not designers, and I love his work, and he's written a whole book about white space. So and a whole course. Actually, I've just bought his course on white space, and I'm really looking forward to it, because it's such an important thing to bear in mind, and typography is no different.
Okay, now let's focus on the styling of text elements. Now, using all caps to catch user attention. It's so easy. I can make text all caps. Hey, I'm screaming, you need to read this. Now, how much is too much or too less from typographic perspective about using, uppercase all caps text?
Okay, I'll tell you one accessibility thing that I didn't know, that I just found out yesterday. When you write text in all caps and you don't style it as uppercase. If you enter it from your computer as holding down shift or holding down caps lock, a screen reader will read it letter by letter. Can you imagine? I didn't know.
That's criminal.
It's criminal. So guys, that's why we need to do things correctly. For that reason, it needs to be done. Use CSS. Don't ever do caps by holding down shift or caps lock.
I think I can do the calculation. 80 to 90% of times people just type in the full caps. They don't care about CSS.
It's crazy. So accessibility is actually a legal requirement. So you shouldn't do that. So I found that out yesterday. I was like, I don't do it. I never do it, because I like to try out different styles. I like to design in browser, because those of us who use page builders design in browser, basically. Sometimes I do wireframes, but I like to design in browser. So I like to see how things look in different styles. So therefore I use CSS. I would never do that. But so yes, going back to your question, there are a few things about using caps. Now, first of all, it does mean that you're screaming. You are shouting, and I like that. I also like certain typefaces I like much more when they're in caps than when they are in small caps. But another point is that what I like is the fact that when letters are in caps, it's a very, very regular block. There is no differentiation. It is same height and same baseline, which I like visually because it gives me a sense of order, and I'm an OCD designer. But people with, for instance, dyslexia don't like that. They just see a block of something, and it's more difficult for them to differentiate it. So it's fine if it's in very short sentences, like for instance, for headings, it's fine, but don't make your headings long. Like, for instance, I use caps in my slides. When I do talks or when I do courses, I use caps. Whenever, but it's never, I think it's at most 10 words, maximum 10 words, because the way I do the talks, I like to have just one main concept there, and then I talk about it. Otherwise, there's no point doing the talk. You might as well just give out the slides. So it's a very short sentence, and I like that it's in your face. I like the boldness of caps for that reason. But it is shouting, and it's not good for legibility for a lot of people. And for long sentences, it's a no-no. And screen readers will read it letter by letter.
The criminal part.
Yeah.
And what about mixing of other styles like italics, underline, bold?
Well, as you very well know, these styles have an actual semantic meaning in HTML. When you use or in CSS, they have a meaning on the web, and you should follow those rules, because even bearing accessibility in mind, when we follow basic HTML5 semantic structures and so on, you're fine. You will find that, yes, there's lots more that you need to bear in mind, but you have a very, very, very good start. So if you want something to be stylistically different, don't use italics, because unless you mean to give it emphasis, because that's what it means on the web. It's not like that in print. It's different. In print, italics generally is for quotes, but on the web, italics is for emphasis, and bold also is the tag is strong, so it means that it's a particularly important concept. So unless that's what you mean, don't use it, because again, a screen reader will not be able to interpret the meaning correctly, and really your content needs to be understandable by everyone. So if you need to make a stylistic difference, by all means do it. Create classes with styles using, instead of using italics, use the M tag, use a style. That's fine. Use CSS, use your font, your typefaces styles, but use it sparingly, because if you create, there's two things that can go wrong with your styling. You could make things look too much the same, and in that case, your user will have a problem making differentiations. But you could make everything look too different, in which case there will be total confusion trying to identify the different meanings, because our brain, trying to work as little as possible, as we were saying, tends to give different meanings to things that look different. So very simple.
Now let's talk about something very fancy now. Even though we are done with the phase of blinking text, remember those old HTML websites? Now, those animation things have been replaced with more smoother looking, text animation effects. Now, does typographic principles approve of this sophisticated, modern looking version of animated text flying from here, there, everywhere?
Okay, again, this is a pet peeve of mine for a number of reasons. Now, first of all, because I am also a designer that has come from print and from a typically creative environment where I had to find concepts, do campaigns, create film posters. So I come from a completely creative environment. The web works in a different way. It's good to be creative, but it's not there for you to have fun. It's not there for you to show off how clever you are, how intelligent and creative you are, and how good you are with CSS. It's not there for that reason at all. So same as what we were saying earlier, really animations are okay when they have a reason to exist. And they must be used sparingly, because out of all the things that can bother someone visiting your website, animations are the worst. And by all means, if you have to animate something, make sure that it only animates once, that it's not on a loop, because on a loop is going to drive everyone crazy. And yes, so it's a particularly sore point for me, because I get motion sickness. Like I cannot stand the current trend of having videos as the hero image on the landing page of websites. I can't stand it. It actually makes me physically sick. It sounds extreme, but it happens to me. So it definitely happens to other people, and you don't want to run the risk of alienating anyone visiting your website. So text animations, give me a good reason, and then you can do it. But I need to have a good reason. And because that's a general thing with design in general, you have to have a reason. So when I do in my courses and in my talks, my angle always is, I'm giving you a reason why you need to make this choice, so that next time you won't make a random choice or be confused about what to do. And plus, very, very importantly, you will be able to go to your client and say, this is why I did it. And this is why what you are asking me to do should not be done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's talk about colors now. Just like fonts, how many colors is too much or too less on a web page design that follow, again, basic typographical principle?
Color is another. I love color. I absolutely love color. If it were done to me, it would be like a million colors on the same web page. I absolutely love it. But it's quite treacherous again, because colorblindness is a very, very common ailment that actually many more people than you think
even
suffer from.
I seem to have it, because everything with blue shade looks blue to me, and my 4-year-old will say it's not blue, it's purple, it's cyan. I said, okay, but for me it's blue.
Amazing. And I bet that you didn't even know.
Yeah, I because when someone asks me which color I'm going to use on a design, I rarely say the names. I remember colors by their HTML codes. You ask me a color code, I'll just say that with color code. That's how I remember colors.
That's amazing. I had a friend who was like that. He was unable to name colors. He would tell me, I can see them, but I cannot tell the names. I don't know what the name of that color. I can tell it's different from that other one, but I can't remember it. It's amazing. So there you go. It's quite common. It tends to be men that suffer from color blindness more than women, but it's something like 8% of men. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a very, very, very high percentage.
Imagine how many of them are on the web.
Exactly. And you just don't know, and also it's about colorblindness, yes, but there are general rules that apply to anything. Like, for instance, if you were to use two complementary colors, which means two colors that on the color wheel sit opposite to one another in text combinations, then the contrast would be too strong and you wouldn't be able to see them properly. So that's one thing. Then the thing with color blindness is that a color palette that you think I'm saying a designer that has no color blindness impairments at all, you may choose a color palette that looks to you as if it's very garish and with a lot of contrast in terms of hue. Hue is the color. So colors that, for instance, a really bright yellow and a really bright pink. You go, yeah, these two colors are completely different from one another. But it may be that when you run them through a color blindness filter, you realize that actually they are very similar, because certain types of color blindness, if these colors have a similar level of
Right.
brightness
And they will also
or
bleed.
intensity, they also bleed. Yeah, there's also that. But with a similar brightness and or darkness and intensity of color, that means saturation, they actually, hue that look completely different could look very similar to people with color blindness. So you should never rely just on hue. Hue means just color. So when you want to use, actually my recommendation, and I am someone who absolutely loves color, is to use one color. I mean, look at big brands like, look at Facebook or LinkedIn. They have one brand color. And to do all that, their differentiations, all their buttons and so on, they use different brightness and darkness of that color.
Yeah.
Or the shades, they use tricks like that, but they don't actually rely on hue. The Facebook blue could be any other color. No significance is given to the color in terms of the functionality. It's just it. So that's the rule. And I have done actually quite a lecture on that, and there's a post on the Design for Geeks website as well, because it's something I feel quite strongly about, and I suffer from it because I love to paint. I take photos. I live for color. I love it. But it's basically the safest thing to have is to use rely on a palette to create your UI that has one main color, and then you work with the brightness. Yeah. You can have another color. You can, of course you can, but make sure that you run everything through one of the thousands of color tools that you can use online to make sure that it's visible. And above all, the contrast with the background is very, very, very important. So especially for small copy, your body copy, you need to check that the contrast between the color of your copy and the background follows WC3 rules. Yeah. So and there's again so there's tools to check that. There's plenty of them. And in general, it's said that you should use an off white, so a slightly gray background and a dark gray text. Now, even with that, you need to be careful, because you shouldn't go to the extreme of having too little contrast, which can happen. So you need to be careful. But yes, that's another really important thing for typography.
Okay, now let's talk about designing for a specific type of audience. Now, can we be a little flexible about typographic principles when designing for a specific set of users, like feminine designs for women? They generally have very light colors, very small sizes. I don't know why. Maybe women can read it, but for me, I can hardly read, or, it just the whole design looks like a one brick and you just see it and just move away. Is that a trend, or does like women audience just relate to that kind of thing more?
I'm a woman. I don't like it. Those are trends. They are trends, and they're trends because there's a lot of people who design on the web these days, and not all of them have thought about it long enough. I don't want to judge anyone, because I think that people are doing an amazing job sometimes with no skills. They're doing an amazing job. But that sort of so-called feminine design kind of trend is pervasive, and is very not very good from both from a communication point of view and from an accessibility and usability point of view. For instance, the tendency to use scripts. Scripts are a typeface that's handwritten, basically. And a lot of this kind of feminine, I hate it because I'm feminine and I don't identify with that kind of design at all. But anyway, it's first of all, when a trend is taken up by too many people, then it just all looks the same. Yeah. There is no differentiation. You might as well not bother doing any branding, because you just look like 1,000 other health coaches. Yeah, basically.
Because now if you say feminine design, the only thing comes to mind, subtle faded colors and very small text.
Yeah. Pastel colors and very small text. So it's clear when I see those websites, I understand that it's been, probably they've used the theme bought from Theme Forest, and they've used a designer who maybe has good taste, it looks nice, but they haven't thought about these things. So no, it just shouldn't be done, because again, go to Google's material design rules and check that out, and you see that your text is too small, that the color doesn't have enough contrast with the background, that a script font gives huge legibility problems for people with dyslexia, for instance, and that you know, it's dull as dishwater as well, but that's taste. And the thing with good design is that good design should never be about taste. So that's why, like I said earlier, it's about having a good reason for doing something. But if I have a stronger reason, then the stronger reason needs to win. And what always needs to win is that usability and accessibility and user experience, which is linked to usability.
You just mentioned go and see Google's material design, and people will go there and see, oh no, but this is not feminine enough.
But you can, though, if you do it properly, you can do it really, really feminine. You use a script that is legible as well, because legibility is when what happens is that some typefaces have letters that are so elaborate that they look like something else. They're not immediately recognizable as a letter, as the letter B, for instance. If it's got loads of flourishes, then it might look like something else. And because our brain wants to work as little as possible, and it tends to go and recognize patterns, things that that the brain is familiar with. If you see the B first as something else, like as a tree, then your brain just sees the tree and it doesn't see the letter B, and it's just like, So again, whenever you give your visitor's brain too much work to do, you're losing. You're not doing your job properly, and that's why scripts are not great.
And feminine design is not the only problem area or labeled as problem area. There's an other end of the spectrum. We have that super creative agency type of designs that win most of the awards, go to AWW awards.
I know.
Now, they look really good, but when it comes to actually consuming the content, what's written there, it's like a royal kick to typography.
I tell you what, I love it that you mentioned this. I absolutely love it, because it's my fun thing to do, to go to the awards website and check. And it's so typical of designers who come from print and creative agencies that definitely do creative stuff, but it's completely unusable. And actually, in the Design for Geeks Facebook group, we used to do it quite a bit. There's also a newsletter from Site of the Day, and I don't know if you knew Vaughan Simmons, who was a beloved member of our WordPress community, who unfortunately left us. But anyway, he used to post every Friday in the group.
I know him. He has
Site of the Day.
Pixel, and he had a studio with Pixel. I know him from Genesis days.
Yes, exactly. He was such a brilliant guy. Anyway, and he would post every the site of the week on Friday, and we would just laugh. The thing is that I don't want to. Then I thought I would do episodes of the live show taking these sites down, but then I just thought, no, I don't want to do that, because these people are doing their best, and they are doing. It's not nice to tear down somebody else's work.
Winning awards.
Well, that makes me laugh. I mean, actually, if someone doesn't win awards for websites, I think they've done a good job. It's just because. So it's hilarious that they win awards. It's absolutely hilarious. But anyway, the thing is, they just think they're doing something great, and in fact, the whole their creativity is brilliant. The CSS abilities and JS are fantastic, but it's a disaster. I mean, you get sued for stuff like that if you could. There are there are laws. We must do accessible websites, and in fact it should be even a business selling point. You could sell it to your clients. You could say, look, we need to do an accessibility test, and you need to be up to scratch because you could be sued, you know, or you could simply lose customers, which, why would you want that? You know, it's not. So yes, those type of websites I find just such fun to look at.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel mean because it could have been me. I didn't know. You know, I've when I came to the web as a print designer, I was like, I can make things move. It was so exciting that you could make things move, and also that, you know, if you made a mistake, it wouldn't be like 10,000 books going to the dump because you'd made spelling, you know, typos. You hadn't noticed the typo, so that's also quite exciting when you come to the web. Yeah.
Confession time, I do visit those websites once a while just to check what all fancy things I'm missing these days, you know.
No, absolutely. So do I. And I do go for inspiration. I also go for inspiration. In fact, talking about typography, I must mention a website called Typewolf. And it's this guy that he's a fantastic typographer, but he also, interestingly enough, he has a site of the day. He picks a site a day for typography, and they often look amazing, but whenever you go and visit them, 80% of the time it's as fun as the awards, because they are unusable and they have lots of animations, or the typography is so excessive that it becomes unusable or unreadable or whatever. So but it's, apart from that, that's by the by, but as a typographical resource, Typewolf is fantastic, and he knows more about typography than anyone else. He also has a course.
Yeah, someone should start an award website that gives prizes to websites who actually are websites in real terms, like people come there, consume content, and follow at least some parameters of accessibility, if not all.
Absolutely. You know what site I visited today that I was blown away by how brilliant the design is, and yet it's incredibly simple. It's Morten Rand Eriksson website. You know him?
He's a WordPress guy.
Yeah, he's a fantastic WordPress guy, and he has his own blog, and it's a beautiful, beautiful website. And it doesn't have any images. It's basically just typography and little more. It's just content. It's just well-designed content, and I was blown away by the simplicity and beauty of it. So when in doubt, look how he does typography, and he gets it.
Okay, cool. Now let's talk about your toolbox. So which are your current 5 favorite tools that power your online business?
Right. So I am a Beaver Builder girl. So yes. And I can't wait to get your course, actually, because I am sure that I am missing out on a lot of things that I could be doing with Beaver or more efficiently, definitely. So I use Beaver Builder. I use either Astra or Generate Press. And again, they're two fantastic, really lightweight themes that are accessible to start with. They're built very, very well. So with accessibility, the thing is that if you use good tools, you are halfway there or even more, unless you mess things up with lots of animations along the way, or with 15 fonts on the same page. So then I use I use so many tools, actually. So if I have to restrict it to 5,
so you've done with 2. Number 3?
Yeah, 2. Then number 3 is offline. For things that I do offline, I use InDesign sometimes, and I used to be a total Photoshop person. I used to teach it, but now I use it less and less and less and less and less, and I think there are so many other tools that are better than Photoshop.
Have you tried Affinity Photo? It's really good.
I haven't, because the thing is that I still need the Adobe subscription. I remember when Kim Doyle left Adobe, and I was like, oh my God, that's such a brave move. But I use it for so many things, and I have an educational subscription, and I can get it doesn't cost very much. It's only like $25 a month so it doesn't make sense for me to not use it. And also I'm lazy, and Photoshop, I know I know it so well, but there are so many alternatives, and it's a very, very bloated tool. But when I do wireframes, I would never ever use Photoshop or for any kind of wireframes or even more complex prototyping. You know, even if I'm asked to design a page, I would never use Photoshop because it's not what it was meant for. It's not a layout tool. It's a photo editing and manipulation tool. So it will do amazing things if you're doing a film poster. It's incredibly frustrating with all the layers and everything if you're building a web page. So in that case, it's Sketch. I love using Sketch, but Adobe XD is also good. And for UX flows and sitemaps, I use Flow. I'm sorry, I'm having a senior moment. I can't remember it. It's Flow. I need to find it in my Flow map.
Okay.
Flow map with 2 P's. Flowmap.com. It's so easy to use, and to use the flows is fantastic. So how many have I got now?
We are over 5 now. So let's move to the next question, which is a recommended web hosting service.
Okay, this is a big question, isn't it? I am currently on Cloudways. So I've gone from SiteGround to Flywheel to Cloudways. And I am currently very happy with Cloudways because it's really cheap. And it does sometimes get things wrong, but they do sort them out in the end. And it gives me a lot of freedom because basically Cloudways, they're managed servers, but you have your own servers. And I can have, like, I had the issue, one of the reasons why is because I had the issue that I had a client who was based in the UK and they were getting really nervous because of Brexit. So they wanted a dedicated server. I know I can do that with with Flywheel as well, but they wanted to have their own server, and it's so much easier and cheaper to do it on Cloudways because basically Cloudways gives you a dashboard, and you can get a DigitalOcean server, a Volta server, different servers.
Yeah.
Flywheel was a good experience. It's fully managed. I didn't have a bad experience with Flywheel, but it's just really, really, really expensive. And it got to the point where I didn't understand why I should spend that much money. And it just became much more difficult to start a new project, for instance, because it would be like, okay, well, that means I need to open, because I've run out of space, I need to either get I need to get another freelance subscription, which means you need to get, which costs $100 a month. And I'm like, but I just want to try another project. And you can't get,
in Flywheel, you have like WordPress install, per WordPress install account, like you can't have like one account and have multiple sites. Like you have accounts with fixed number of sites that you can have. And the typical is 10 sites. So you can't do, for instance, you cannot do subdomains. And I used to build so much stuff on subdomains, And on SiteGround.
I love my subdomains. So now I can do whatever I want, so it just it's just made it so much easier. I've resurrected old projects, and now I can afford to, it just cost me $2 a month to.
Okay, next question. I already know the answer, but I'll still ask. Maybe you have some new answer coming up, maybe now or maybe down the line, which is a recommended page builder.
Yeah, of course, they're in there also in your presence. What else am I going to say? No, Beaver Builder, I love it to bits. I love it to pieces. The thing is that I am now really curious about Elementor. I am. I mean, it's normal to be because also I am in other communities that specifically use Elementor, like Dave Foy's community. He uses Elementor, and I hear a lot about it. But basically, it's a page builder that works along the same principles as Beaver Builder. So it's an acceptable one.
Yeah, I have a different direction. Like I'm pretty happy with Beaver Builder, but I am more excited about Gutenberg blocks and all that, how they are evolving.
Okay.
Because I have few plans, few things that are being developed on those blocks just to try out how things, and I wouldn't be surprised if Beaver Builder modules are available as Gutenberg blocks down the line. Even Robbie gave little hint in the recent blog post, and everyone will do that. Even Elementor will do that, because WordPress will bring everyone in one line very soon. Because
that's so interesting. I have to confess that I haven't yet played with Gutenberg. I just have not had the time, and I need to do it. But I've got Classic on all my sites.
Even I use Classic, but I do tend to, play it on a separate install just to see. If you play it just as a plain vanilla blocks that are there in WordPress, that won't be much fun. But if you install a third-party blocks add-on, then it's sort of like a page builder experience. Like you have lots of modules available, one for testimonials, one for, image, videos, etc. So it's just like a page builder, but little, less UX UI, like very simple, no full width canvas, just a small box to play around. Probably they will change it. I think things will get clear when they release the third and fourth phase of Gutenberg, and they have already hinted that you can build your headers and you can build your menus in blocks rather than changing the options in customizer. So that would be really exciting. That would be like you building a whole theme in blocks, just like we use Beaver Themer to use Beaver Builder blocks. So exciting times, but I guess that will only happen by end of this year. So still a lot of time for page builders and page builders will catch up with something new, because it's hard for Gutenberg to catch with them as of now. Okay, so the next one, which is your recommended email marketing service.
I use ActiveCampaign. I really, really like it. I used to use ConvertKit, but there's no comparison. I really like ActiveCampaign a lot, because also they have very good support. They have a chat support, which is open in US times, but they're brilliant. And I love all the automations, the tagging, and the price. ConvertKit was so much more expensive than ActiveCampaign. I was on it for a long time, but I now really, that's my favorite thing. I know that a lot of people love Drip, and I do think that it's great, but ActiveCampaign is my favorite right now. It's not fantastic design.
Yeah, that is where I'm going to come, because it's an old horse, but it is very powerful horse as compared to, ActiveCampaign is like the design, the look is like little primitive, but the features it provides is more powerful than ConvertKit and even Drip.
Yeah, exactly. And it's totally reliable, and they always have a solution for you. And they always, if you don't know how to do something, they do it for you. It's brilliant. And they have very well trained support service. And to me, support is 80% of a product these days.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And any upcoming tool or service that has caught your attention?
Well, like I said, I might give Elementor a try in a customer website. Then chat bots, definitely, for or simply chat boxes for customers' websites. And I'm getting really excited by building funnels, which is not a tool, but it's something I'm getting really excited about. I've just done one with a quiz for a customer, and I built the quiz in Gravity Forms, and that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Because building won't take much time. It's just the testing part. Is it going there? Is it going there? No, it didn't went there. No, something is missing there. That's the only problem when you're building a conditional form.
Yes, but it was so exciting, and I got fantastic help from Mike Sale, from someone from someone in our very generous community. So what I didn't know, he taught me about conditional forms. So in the end, I had a great quiz. So yeah.
Okay, cool. It was amazing talking to you. So any last message for someone who's struggling with the concept of typography?
Well, head off to the Design for Geeks website, because there's a form that you can fill to be informed when the free typography course will be ready. So yeah, so please do. There's 2 free courses coming, which will be followed by paid courses on the same subject, but one is UX for everyone, and the other one is essentials of typography, but basically it's the UX of typography as well. So
that's designforgeeks.com, right?
Yes, it is. And there's also Facebook group.
Okay. Though besides those two places, any other place where people can connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. And there's also a Design for Geeks YouTube channel that I have a lot of videos to edit, to upload. And then I am on Instagram. I do my paintings there, and it's really sad because it's been months since I last posted. But when I have like bursts of activity, like for like 3 months, I'll be there every day, and then I disappear. But yeah.
Okay, cool, Piccia. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. It's been such fun. Thank you.